The roar of the crowd was deafening, a wild mix of cheers and gasps as the unthinkable unfolded under the bright arena lights. Two legends, born from entirely different worlds, now stood face to face, their paths colliding in a way no one could have ever predicted. On one side, Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, a force of nature whose fists had carved his name into the annals of boxing history. On the other, Jeff Hardy, the daredevil enigma, a high-flying warrior whose resilience and fearless spirit had captivated millions. The energy in the arena was electric, crackling with anticipation as fans held their breath, knowing they were witnessing something beyond extraordinary. This wasn't just a match. This was a clash of two different realms of combat, a battle between brute strength and sheer defiance, between knockout power and unbreakable will. Few ever dared to step into the ring with Mike Tyson, let alone someone whose battlefield had always been the squared circle of professional wrestling. Hardy wasn't built like a heavyweight boxer, nor did he fight like one. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in something just as dangerous and utter disregard for his own limits. He had been battered, broken, and beaten down countless times before, yet he always got back up. Against Tyson, though, that kind of resilience might not be enough. The former undisputed heavyweight champion wasn't just fast, he was explosive, unpredictable, and relentless. One clean shot could end everything in an instant. But Hardy had spent his entire career proving people wrong. The question wasn't just whether he could survive, it was whether he could find a way to do the impossible. The air in the arena carried an almost tangible weight, a tension thick enough to make every heartbeat feel heavier. Fans watched in disbelief, some still trying to process how this match had even come to be. What had started as a war of words had spiraled into something far more dangerous. It began when Hardy, in one of his unpredictable promos, made a bold statement about defying limits and facing any challenge, no matter how impossible. His words reached Tyson, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life. What started as playful banter quickly escalated, and before anyone knew it, the challenge had been made. The boxing icon and the wrestling daredevil would settle it, not in a scripted confrontation, not in a controlled exhibition, but in a real, no-holds-barred fight. This wasn't about championship belts or promotional deals. It was about pride, about proving something to themselves and the world. Tyson, though long retired from professional boxing, still carried an aura of dominance, his presence alone enough to make most men hesitate. Hardy, on the other hand, had spent his life leaping off ladders and crashing through tables, turning pain into art and suffering into spectacle. But this fight wasn't about high spots or dramatic storytelling. It was about surviving the raw, unforgiving reality of combat. One punch from Tyson had sent world-class fighters crumbling to the canvas, yet Hardy's entire existence had been built on enduring what should have been impossible to endure. As the final seconds before the fight ticked away, the tension in the arena reached a fever pitch. Tyson's fists twitched at his sides, a storm waiting to be unleashed. Hardy bounced on his feet, his eyes locked onto the man in front of him, unshaken, unafraid. The contrast between them was almost poetic. One a symbol of controlled destruction, the other a living embodiment of reckless defiance. The referee gave the final instructions, but neither man was listening. This wasn't just another fight. This was something different, something that had never been seen before. Then the bell rang. Tyson exploded forward, his speed defying all logic, a blur of movement that had brought down giants. Hardy dodged, barely, his instincts the only thing keeping him from immediate disaster. The crowd erupted, a mix of shock and exhilaration as the fight began in a way no one could have predicted. Tyson was a hunter, relentless, cutting off the ring with practiced precision. But Hardy, unpredictable as ever, refused to stand still. He moved, weaving in and out, searching for openings where none should exist. The battle was on, and there was no turning back. One man had the power to end it in an instant. The other had the heart to keep going no matter what. The only question left was which would break first. Hardy barely had time to process what had just happened. The moment the bell rang, Tyson was on him, closing the distance in a way that felt almost supernatural. He wasn't just fast, he was precise, cutting off every possible escape route before Hardy could even think about slipping away. A right hook came flying, inches from Hardy's face, missing only because his instincts had kicked in at the last possible second. The sound of Tyson's gloves slicing through the air was enough to make the crowd gasp. Hardy knew this wasn't just another fight. He had spent his entire career pushing boundaries, but this was different. This was survival. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could still hear the warnings. His closest friends had tried to talk him out of it, even those who had seen him walk away from the worst that wrestling had to offer. "This isn't the same," they had told him. "Tyson isn't here to put on a show." But Hardy had never been one to back down. His entire life had been a series of moments where the world told him he couldn't do something, and each time he had proved them wrong. He wasn't about to stop now. Tyson, however, had nothing to prove. He was a living legend, a man who had built his name on sheer, unfiltered destruction. He didn't need to be here. He had walked away from boxing years ago, leaving behind a legacy that few could even dream of matching. And yet, something about Hardy's challenge had struck a nerve. Maybe it was the way the younger man spoke, the reckless confidence in his voice, as if he truly believed he could stand toe-to-toe with one of the most feared fighters in history. Maybe it was curiosity, a lingering hunger buried deep inside Tyson's chest, a part of him that still craved the thrill of the fight. Whatever it was, it had brought him here, and now that the fight had started, he wasn't about to hold back. A sudden burst of movement caught Hardy off guard. Tyson feinted left, then came in with a vicious uppercut, just barely missing as Hardy stumbled back. The crowd erupted again, sensing just how close it had been. Hardy's mind raced. He knew he couldn't outpunch Tyson, no one could. His only chance was to keep moving, stay unpredictable, and hope to wear the former champ down. But Tyson wasn't giving him a chance to think. Another punch came, and this time, Hardy wasn't fast enough. The impact sent him staggering. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it might as well have been. His vision blurred for a split second, and his body screamed in protest. The power behind Tyson's fists was unlike anything he had ever experienced. In wrestling, Hardy had been slammed through tables, tossed off ladders, even sent crashing into steel, but none of that compared to this. This was different. This was real. The crowd had no idea what to make of it. Some had expected Hardy to be finished the moment the fight began. Others believed in the impossible, hoping he would somehow find a way to turn the tide. But right now, it was Tyson's fight. He was controlling the ring, dictating the pace, and forcing Hardy into a desperate game of survival. Somewhere in the audience, a man watched with narrowed eyes, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his seat. He had seen many fights in his life, but this one was unlike any other. It wasn't just about skill or power, it was about something deeper. The way Tyson moved, the way Hardy refused to go down, it all felt personal. This wasn't just an exhibition. There was something else going on here, something beneath the surface that no one had figured out yet. Tyson stepped forward again, eyes locked onto his opponent, his face unreadable. Hardy shook the cobwebs from his head, wiping a streak of blood from the corner of his mouth. He could see the question in Tyson's eyes, the same question everyone else was asking. How much more could he take? Hardy didn't know the answer. He only knew one thing: he wasn't done yet. Then, for the first time since the fight started, Hardy did something no one expected. He smiled. Not out of arrogance, not out of foolishness, but because deep down, he understood something that most people didn't. Tyson had spent his career breaking men, but Hardy had never been like other fighters. He wasn't here to win. He was here to endure. And that was what scared Tyson the most. Tyson's eyes narrowed as he caught the faintest smirk on Hardy's face. It wasn't the kind of grin that came from arrogance or mockery. It was something else entirely. It was the look of a man who had accepted the pain, embraced it, and was still standing. For the first time that night, something shifted in Tyson's expression. He had fought monsters in his prime, men who had dedicated their entire lives to the art of boxing, warriors who lived and breathed the fight. And yet, none of them had ever looked at him like this. None of them had ever smiled through the storm, knowing full well they were facing something they couldn't possibly overcome. Hardy's body ached, every nerve screaming at him to stay down, to stop pushing forward against a man whose very name had once sent opponents into retreat. But that wasn't in his nature. His entire life had been about defying the odds, about standing up when no one believed he could. And right now, standing across from him, Tyson was realizing that this wasn't a fight about power or skill. It was about something deeper, something more unsettling. It was about endurance, about who could outlast the other, not in physical strength, but in sheer, unbreakable will. Tyson's stance adjusted, his weight shifting slightly as he studied Hardy with newfound caution. He had planned to end this quickly, overwhelm Hardy with speed and force before the younger man had a chance to react. But something felt off. He had landed clean shots, powerful enough to put most men to sleep, yet Hardy was still here, still moving. That wasn't normal. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. And for the first time, doubt flickered in Tyson's mind. From the crowd, the man who had been watching intently leaned forward, his fingers curling into a loose fist. There was something about the way Hardy absorbed the punishment, the way he kept pushing through every blow that didn't sit right. It wasn't just heart, it was something else. Something unnatural. And that's when the thought crept in, unshakable and unsettling. Did Hardy know something no one else did? Tyson snapped back into focus as Hardy lunged, a rare offensive move from the high-flying enigma. It wasn't a boxer's strike, nothing clean, nothing technical. It was wild, unpolished, and yet, somehow, it landed. The crowd erupted, shocked that Hardy had actually connected. It didn't do much damage, but that wasn't the point. The point was that Hardy had found an opening, and he wasn't stopping there. For the first time in the fight, Tyson was forced to back up. It was only a few steps, but it was enough to change the energy in the arena. Hardy pressed forward, his movements erratic, unpredictable. He wasn't trying to match Tyson's technique. He was turning this into something else, something Tyson wasn't prepared for. Hardy wasn't fighting like a boxer. He was fighting like a survivor, like a man who didn't care about form or precision. All that mattered was momentum, and somehow, against all logic, he was gaining it. Tyson's jaw tightened as he reset his stance, but something in the back of his mind nagged at him. This was different from any opponent he had ever faced. He had fought trained killers, men who had spent decades perfecting their craft, but Hardy was something entirely new. He wasn't trying to win in the traditional sense. He was trying to outlast. And suddenly, Tyson realized the truth. Hardy had never expected to knock him out. He wasn't here for a quick victory. He was here to drag Tyson into deep waters, to push him into a battle of endurance, to test a different kind of strength. That realization sent a ripple through Tyson's chest. For years he had been the storm, the force that ended fights before they could even begin. But now, for the first time in as long as he could remember, he was being forced into something unknown. And that's when it hit him. Hardy wasn't just surviving. He was leading Tyson into something else entirely. And Tyson had no idea what was waiting for him on the other side. Tyson's fists clenched as he took a deep breath, steadying himself. Something was wrong. He wasn't just fighting Hardy. He was fighting an idea, an energy that refused to break no matter how much damage he inflicted. Hardy should have been done by now. Anyone else would have collapsed under the weight of those punches. But somehow, against all logic, Hardy was still standing. He wasn't winning in the conventional sense, he was barely keeping up, but that wasn't the point. The point was that he had forced Tyson into the unknown, into a place where brute strength alone wasn't enough. Hardy's body screamed for relief, his lungs burning, his legs barely holding him up. He could feel the bruises forming, the deep ache settling in, but none of that mattered. He had already lasted longer than anyone expected. Every second he remained on his feet was a victory, a testament to the fact that he wasn't supposed to be here, yet here he was. Tyson's face gave nothing away, but Hardy could sense it, the slight hesitation, the realization that this wasn't the fight he thought it would be. And in that tiny shift, Hardy saw his only chance. Summoning whatever strength he had left, Hardy lunged forward again, this time not with a punch, but something far more reckless. He leapt, twisting his body midair, wrapping his arm around Tyson's head in a move that should have been impossible to pull off in a real fight. It wasn't boxing, it wasn't strategy, it was pure instinct, pure Hardy. The crowd gasped as the momentum carried them both downward. Tyson caught off guard just long enough for Hardy to take him down in the only way he knew how. They hit the mat hard, the impact shaking the entire ring. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. Tyson wasn't used to being taken off his feet. He wasn't used to anyone dictating the terms of a fight. And in that moment of shock, Hardy did something no one had ever done to him. He forced the fight into an entirely different realm. Tyson's instincts kicked in fast, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He twisted, rolling away, regaining his footing within seconds. But the damage had been done. The crowd saw it, Tyson saw it, and Hardy felt it. This wasn't just a boxing match anymore. The rules had been shattered, and for the first time, Tyson was the one who had to adjust. For a moment, neither man moved. They just stood there, breathing hard, staring each other down. The fight had gone beyond technique, beyond strength. It was about something more. Tyson exhaled slowly, nodding once, as if acknowledging the reality of the moment. Hardy wiped the sweat from his brow, his body barely holding itself together, but there was no fear in his eyes. He had already won in his own way. Then, Tyson did something no one expected. He stepped back, lowered his hands, and gave a small, knowing smile. It wasn't one of defeat, nor was it one of arrogance. It was respect, the kind of respect Tyson had rarely given any opponent in his entire career. The referee hesitated, unsure of what was happening, but the message was clear. The fight, at least in the way it started, was over. The crowd erupted, some in shock, others in awe. There was no official winner, no knockout, no clear ending. But in a way, that was the perfect conclusion. Hardy had come into this fight knowing he couldn't win in the traditional sense. Tyson had entered believing he could end it in seconds. But what had unfolded was something neither of them expected, an unspoken battle of will, a test of something deeper than just skill or power. As they met in the center of the ring, Hardy extended his hand. Tyson looked at it for a long moment before finally reaching out and shaking it. No words were spoken, but none were needed. They had both learned something that night, something about themselves, about fighting, about what it meant to stand in the face of impossible odds. As Hardy stumbled out of the ring, his body wrecked but his spirit unshaken, he glanced back one last time. Tyson was still standing there watching him, the faintest trace of a smirk on his face. It wasn't often that the world saw something truly unique, something that defied expectations in every way possible. But that night, they had, and neither man would ever forget it.